The wind moved like a slow ghost through the trees, dry pine needles whispering secrets above the earth, snow falling soft as breath. Somewhere past the edge of Blessing Creek, where fences thinned and judgment grew thick, a girl's face blinked against the falling light. Her lips were blue. Her lashes, trembling frost. Only her head remained above ground. The dirt around her throat was packed hard and wet with melting snow. She didn't cry. Hallie Renfield had already done that last night when her father shoved her into the hole and called it justice. For what, she never asked. She'd learned long ago that no answer would spare her. He'd called her a curse. Said a woman who couldn't bring a child into the world had no right walking above it. Said burying her might make the Lord reconsider. She'd said nothing. She never did. Time had slowed to something inhuman, shivering daylight that moved across her cheeks while crows circled and townsfolk passed by with averted eyes. The preacher rode past on his bay gelding and didn't stop. The barkeep's wife had looked once, hand over her child's eyes. Even the sheriff muttered something about family matters and trotted on. Hallie thought of snowflakes once, how her mother used to say each one was different. She imagined they were all just the same now, blank, cruel, and falling. When the sound of hooves returned to the clearing, she no longer looked. She had given up the hope of being seen. But the horse stopped. Then another. And another. Footsteps. Not hurried. Not startled. Just slow. Heavy. Measured. "Papa," a child's voice whispered, soft and unsure. "There's a lady in the dirt." Hallie forced her eyes open. The light hurt now. She could make out shapes, 4 small ones, one towering. The giant knelt beside her. No guns drawn. No laughter. No shame. Just dark eyes and a leather glove brushing snow from her brow. He didn't ask what she was doing there. Didn't ask what she'd done. He said, "You still breathing?" She nodded, barely. He nodded too, once. Quietly. Then he took off his gloves and began to dig. She watched the dirt fly. His hands were strong, blistered and calloused, but moved with care, like he was uncovering something sacred. His coat, long and fur-lined, opened slightly as he worked, revealing a muscled chest marked with old scars and the stitched beadwork of his people. She wanted to say thank you. But her throat made only air. A little girl, maybe 6, sat beside her and offered a biscuit wrapped in cloth. "I'm Clover," she said gently. "You can have this. We already ate." Hallie looked at the child's eyes. Brown, warm, and round as winter walnuts. Not afraid. Not judgmental. Just offering. The dirt gave way an inch at a time. Her shoulder emerged. Then her arms. The sun dipped lower. The man didn't stop. He dug until the earth sighed loose from her ribs, until she fell into his arms like a bundle of roots and frost. He carried her gently, cradled like she might break if jostled. She felt the thrum of his chest against her ear. It was the first heartbeat she'd felt that didn't come from fear. The children followed, 2 boys, one with coal dark hair braided down his back, the other fairer and more curious. A second girl with a tooth missing held a wool blanket tight, dragging it behind her. No one from town stopped them. Not even when the man passed by the general store and met the shopkeeper's eye. The shopkeeper blinked, spat, and said, "You'll regret taking her. Some soil don't grow again." The man didn't reply. He just adjusted her weight in his arms and kept walking. They passed the church. The bell didn't ring. They passed the Renfield farm. Her father's mule stared through the fence. Amos Renfield himself was not there. Drunk or hiding, maybe both. Still no one stopped him. Hallie drifted in and out of blackness. When she woke again, she lay in a small wooden cabin where firelight touched every beam. A quilt covered her. The scent of pine smoke and bread filled the room. She turned her head. A pot simmered on the stove. Boots by the door. Tiny coats hung on wooden pegs. A child snored under the table wrapped in a buffalo hide. He was sitting nearby. The man. Sure off now, tending to a scar on his arm, humming something in a low voice, no words, just sound like a lullaby remembered from long ago. She tried to sit up and couldn't. He looked over but didn't rise. Just nodded once. You're safe. Cabin's warm. You'll stay till you're strong. Why? Her voice cracked like thin ice. He didn't answer directly. Just stirred the fire and said, "Ground's no place for someone who breathes." The next morning, he was gone before dawn. Left food by the bed. The children fed the fire. Giggled once or twice. Hallie ate with shaking hands. Then slept again. That night, she awoke with a cry buried again in her mind, snow on her lips, darkness pressing her throat. The door creaked open. The man stood there with a basket of firewood and a fox slung over his shoulder. She wept, quietly. Her shoulders shook. She hated herself for it. He walked past her. Placed the fox near the stove. Didn't speak. She whispered, "I'm broken." He paused. Then turned, voice low. Only thing strong enough to be broken can survive being buried. Silence again. Then his hand, placing a tin cup of warm broth beside her. He didn't touch her. Just that. In that cabin nestled deep in the woods, Hallie felt the world tilt just a little. Not a new world. But a different one. One where a girl in the earth could be seen again. Heard. She drifted back to sleep under a quilt she hadn't sewn, with warmth she hadn't earned. And in the dark beyond the cabin walls, the snow began to fall softer, like it too was tired of judgment. Inside, a fire crackled steady. Children breathed deep in their sleep. And a man named Silas Red Elk sharpened a blade, not for war, but for skinning. Quiet hands. Quiet life. But in his eyes, when he looked her way again before turning in, there was something unreadable. Not pity. Not charity. Recognition. Of someone who had clawed up through cold, like he had. Hallie closed her eyes. And for the first time in years, her breath did not feel like a burden. She was not healed. Not whole. Not ready. But she was home. And it was only the beginning. The days in the cabin passed like pages from a quiet book, ones you didn't read aloud, but felt in your bones. Hallie awoke to frost tracing the windows, light bleeding through stitched curtains, and the scent of cornbread softening the air. Her limbs, once stiff from burial, had begun to remember movement. Pain lingered like a dull ghost, but she was no longer afraid to breathe. Silas never hovered. He left early, returned late. Woodpile always full. Game cleaned and skinned before she saw it. No questions. No expectations. Just presence. He moved through the world like a man who'd lost something he didn't speak of. The children Clover, Nico, Mika, and Ash watched her without worry, as if they'd known her all along. No pity, no whispers. Only little offerings, a drawing, a boiled egg, a red ribbon dropped on her pillow. Clover sat with her most often, small legs tucked under her like a fox cub. "You don't talk much," she'd chirp, "but that's all right. Papa says the quiet ones hear everything." Hallie nodded when she could. Her voice still cracked like an old kettle. She hated it. She hated how weak she sounded in a house that smelled of warmth and cedar. One evening, as snow melted on the roof and trickled down like teardrops, she took a slow step into the kitchen. Her fingers, pale but steadier now, reached for the flour sack. She didn't ask. Just started measuring, remembering her mother's hands, remembering rhythm. The bowl, the salt, the cool water. Her arms trembled kneading dough, but she kept going. Mika peeked over the table. "You makin' bread?" Hallie nodded once. The boy grinned and ran out to tell the others, who rushed in like a storm and began setting the table with uneven silverware and carved bowls. One by one, they placed tin cups and folded napkins as if it were Sunday supper. When Silas returned that night, face wind-chapped and quiet as ever, he stopped cold at the scent. Cornbread. Fresh, golden, steam rising. Hallie didn't meet his eyes. She just placed the pan on the table and stepped back. It was a peace offering, not of words but of work. Bread, after all, had fed soldiers and mourners alike. He nodded, took his seat, bowed his head briefly, and broke the first piece without ceremony. Gave half to Ash. Ate the rest in silence. But when the meal was done, he stood, scraped his plate, and said only, "You're strong." Hallie felt that in her marrow more than she ever had a prayer. Later that night, she sat by the fire, threading old yarn into new mittens for Nico. Her hands were raw, but there was a steadiness now. A rhythm forming. Not just in action, but in living. The children began to open. Clover asked if Hallie liked foxes. Ash showed her how to skip stones when the snow thawed. Nico, who'd barely spoken to her, left a carved wooden sparrow at her bedside. Mika, boldest of the lot, told her everything, how Silas had lost his wife 2 winters back, how folks in town whispered about the half-blood house in the woods, and how none of that mattered, 'cause Papa don't hear nonsense, only people. But Hallie heard it. When Silas went into Blessing Creek for supplies, he came back quieter, heavier. The children didn't ask why. Hallie didn't either. But she knew. The town's judgment wore heavy as snowfall. And she, the girl who'd been buried, was now living under the roof of an Apache with 4 children and no ring. That kind of story sharpened tongues like whetstones. The next morning, she stepped out to help with chores. She wasn't asked, but her body needed the motion. Needed to be useful. Silas was chopping firewood. Shirt sleeves rolled. His broad arms moved with grace and power. Hallie picked up the axe without a word. He didn't stop her. She brought it down. Once. Twice. It was crooked. Weak. He stood behind her. Adjusted her grip gently. "No need to force it," he said. "Let the weight do the work." His hands brushed hers. Rough, sure. She tried again. Better. He nodded and stepped back. Watched. They split 6 logs before dusk. No words. Just breath. Just rhythm. Just snow. Inside, they sat before the fire. The children asleep, curled like pups on quilts. Hallie stared into the flames, remembering the hole, the weight of dirt, the sound of her father's boots crunching away. She hadn't spoken his name since that night. Hadn't dared. But now, in the hush of kind firelight, she said softly, "He told me I was barren. That I'd curse any house I lived in. So he dug the earth and said it was the only cradle I'd earn." Silas didn't speak. Didn't look away. She added, "He made the hole a year ago. Said if I didn't prove myself by spring, he'd fill it." Silas stirred the fire with the iron rod. "You saved yourself," he said. "Not many do. Not when they're that far down. I didn't. You dug me out." He turned his gaze to hers. "Only because you hadn't stopped breathing." They sat in silence after that, the kind that wasn't empty but full of truth too heavy to carry in daylight. That night, she dreamed of hands, not her father's, but Silas's, pulling her from the ground. Not violently. Just with certainty. In the days that followed, she stayed. Not out of gratitude. Not out of fear. But because something inside her had begun to thaw, and she wanted to see what grew beneath the ice. She folded laundry with Clover. Learned Nico liked his eggs firm. Brushed Ash's hair as she hummed a tune no one remembered the words to. She watched Silas from the corner of her eye, how he tied his moccasins, how he carved the children's toys at night, how he looked out the window when he thought no one saw. One afternoon, while sweeping the porch, Hallie caught sight of a man on horseback watching the cabin from the ridge. Hat low, face unreadable. Town eyes. He didn't ride down. Just turned and vanished. But she felt it then that the world beyond these pines hadn't forgotten. That shame was still waiting, patient as wolves. That night, Silas brought her a small sack of sugar and said, "Heard you might like to bake again." She didn't ask how he knew. she just made the bread. This time with berries. This time without trembling. And when the children bit into the loaf and cried out in delight, Hallie smiled, just barely, but enough that Clover gasped and said, "See. I told you she had one." Silas didn't say anything. But she saw it, he noticed. The shift. The spark. The cabin was small, the world beyond harsh, but inside these walls, something had started to bloom, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the quiet strength of bread rising slow beside a fire. And though she didn't know what was coming, Hallie began to believe she could face it. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't waiting to be chosen. She was choosing to stay. The snow came heavier that week, falling like it meant to smother the world. The roof creaked beneath its weight. Trees bowed low in silence. But inside the cabin, laughter echoed, thin, fleeting, but real. Ash and Mika had made a game of tracing animal tracks in the frost that formed on the inside of the windows. Clover insisted on naming each one. "That's a snow fox," she said, pointing. "And that one's a wind bear." Hallie watched from the hearth, mending Nico's scarf with slow, steady stitches. Her fingers had grown stronger, steadier since Silas dug her out. And though the ache remained in her bones, a phantom memory of earth pressed against her throat, she'd learned to carry it quieter. Silas entered then, boots dripping meltwater, a rabbit hanging from each hand. He nodded once, and she returned it. That was how it was between them. Words were spare, but eyes carried weight. Small gestures stitched them closer each day. When she rose to help skin the game, she noticed it, his shoulder stiff, his breathing shallow. A wound? No. It wasn't flesh, but something deeper. A tension. A burden that moved behind his ribs. "Something happened?" she asked, surprising herself with the forwardness. He paused, then said, "The storekeep asked where my guest went. Said I should watch for trouble. Town's been talking." Her breath caught, and for a moment the room felt too small. "They think you kidnapped me," she whispered. He shrugged, but it wasn't apathy. It was armor. "They think what they're told. That I took advantage. That I'm not the kind who saves." Hallie gripped the edge of the table. "I'll speak up. I'll go to town." He shook his head. "You don't owe them. You're safe here." "But you aren't," she said quietly. That night, the quiet between them was heavier than the snow on the roof. The children slept curled together on the floor near the fire, and Hallie lingered by the window, staring at the blank white sky. Somewhere beneath that cold, the land still breathed. And maybe she did too. She touched the frost-rimmed glass and whispered, "They buried me because I couldn't make life. But I was never dead." Silas stirred from the shadows. She hadn't known he was still awake. "You don't have to tell me," he said softly. "I need to." She turned, the fire warming one half of her face, leaving the other in shadow. "My mother died birthing my brother. He lived 2 days. My father, he wasn't always cruel, but after that, something snapped. He called me a cursed womb. Said I owed the family a legacy." Silas didn't move. Just listened. His stillness made her brave. "He paid for herbs. Midwives. Had me examined like livestock. Every year that passed without a child, he got worse. He'd pray with a Bible in one hand and a bottle in the other. One night, he dug a hole and said if the ground could grow crops, maybe it could grow a daughter that mattered." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "I said nothing. Let him shovel. I knelt. Got in. I think, part of me believed it too. That maybe I was broken enough to deserve it." Silas stood then. Not fast. Not slow. Just deliberately. "You don't ever say that again." She looked up at him, startled. He stepped closer. "Broken is what they call things they're afraid to understand." Hallie blinked hard, but the tears came anyway. She felt the heat of them on her cheeks, and the shame that followed. "I don't know what I am anymore," she whispered. "You're someone who came back from the dirt," he said. That's more than most. She nodded, and for the first time, the nod wasn't to please anyone, but to accept something. To own it. The next morning, the town's opinion arrived wrapped in waxed paper. A note. Pinned to their barn door with a nail. Return what ain't yours. Or face the law. No name. No signature. Silas read it, crumpled it, and tossed it in the fire. Hallie stood near the doorway, arms folded over her chest. I knew this would come. You didn't bring it, he said. They hate me for surviving. They fear what they can't control. Later that day, Hallie went out to collect kindling. The wind bit harder than usual, swirling around her ankles. She found herself watching the ridge, waiting for a rider, a lawman, her father. But no one came. Until nightfall. A knock at the door. Sharp. Deliberate. Silas opened it. A man stood in the snow, cloak dusted in white. Hat pulled low. Hallie recognized the mouth before the eyes. Thin. Smirking. Familiar. Amos Renfield. Her father. I come for my daughter, he said, looking past Silas. Don't need no bloodshed. Just give her back, and I'll take her proper. Hallie stepped forward. Her legs trembled, but she kept them straight. I'm not yours, she said. Amos raised a brow. You got no papers. No husband. No child. I got law on my side. She's not property, Silas said, voice low and even. Amos laughed. Then why's she hiding with savages? Hallie's fists clenched. Because savages never buried me. Amos sneered. You really think this place is salvation? You think they won't turn on you? You think raising another woman's children makes you whole? Silas stepped forward, but Hallie placed a hand on his arm. I may not be whole, she said, but I'm not yours to finish breaking. The wind howled around them. The children peeked from behind the door, eyes wide and afraid. Amos spat in the snow. This ain't over. No, Hallie said, voice firm, it's just beginning. He left without another word, vanishing into the pines. Inside, the children huddled close. Clover held Hallie's hand without asking. Nico looked at Silas. Will he come back? Silas didn't lie. Maybe. Then we'll stay together, Mika said. All of us. Hallie smiled. It wasn't forced. That night, while the fire cracked and the cabin exhaled peace, Hallie sat beside Silas. You never asked what I want, she said softly. He looked at her. What do you want? I want to stay. Not because I'm broken. Not because I was buried. But because here. I feel like I could grow something. Silas didn't smile. He didn't have to. He just said, then stay. And beneath the hush of falling snow, the world tilted again, just enough to feel like hope. The snow deepened like silence that didn't want to lift. Every morning brought more white, piling on fence posts, softening the edges of trees, cloaking the world in a stillness that made even breath feel loud. The cabin sat nestled in the hush, smoke curling from the chimney, and within its walls, time moved the way it does when a wound is healing, not fast, but forward. Hallie woke each morning earlier than before, her body learning again to rise without flinching. She'd begun wearing one of Silas's flannel shirts over her dresses, sleeves rolled past her elbows, the faint smell of pine and smoke in the fabric comforting in ways she could not explain. Each day brought rhythm, feeding hens, boiling water for the children's tea, folding blankets with Clover, tending to the firewood with Silas. It was there, at the woodpile, where the ghosts seemed to gather. The first time she saw her father's face again, not in person, but in memory, it came not as a scream, but as a whisper. She was stacking logs in the sled when the sharp snap of pine echoed too close to how the shovel had struck earth that day. She dropped the log. Her knees buckled. Silas was there before she hit the ground, steady hands catching her elbows. He didn't ask what she saw. He didn't need to. She sat on the sled, snow biting her calves, and whispered, I don't want to flinch forever. You won't, he said. But the ghosts didn't just live in Hallie. That night, she found Silas sitting outside under the awning, sharpening a blade that didn't need sharpening, his eyes staring past the trees as if something waited just beyond the branches. She sat beside him, their silence familiar now, like the grain of an old table etched with time, worn smooth by use. You ever lose sleep? She asked. He didn't answer right away. The whetstone rasped once more across the steel. Then he said, I buried my wife myself. She died slow. Lung sickness. I carried her to a high ridge, built a stone circle the way my grandfather taught me. Wrapped her in the blanket she made for our wedding night. Hallie stared at her hands. She wanted a fifth child, he said. I said no. Told her we already had our hands full. She died angry. Hallie looked over. You think she's still angry? He shrugged. I think the dead stop caring about blame. It's the living that keep dragging it behind them like a broken wagon. The next day, town made its move. The sheriff himself rode up with 2 men behind him, each wearing the smug look of men who thought they were bringing order. Amos Renfield rode behind them, face flushed and grinning. Silas stepped onto the porch before they knocked. Come for law, or come for trouble? He asked evenly. The sheriff looked down at a crumpled paper. Hallie Renfield's been reported missing. Kidnapped. Her father claims she was taken against her will. Silas didn't glance back. Didn't call her name. He just said loud enough for her to hear, she answers only to herself. Hallie stepped out on her own. Hair pinned back, dress clean, hands calm. I'm not missing, she said. I left. I stayed. I dug myself out, and she gestured to Amos, was the one who buried me. The sheriff shifted, uncomfortable. One of the men behind him muttered something under his breath. Amos's face turned red. She's confused, Amos barked. Been out in the cold too long. Mixed up in savage ways. Hallie stepped off the porch. Do I look confused, Sheriff? Does a woman who bakes bread and rocks children to sleep look like she's been kidnapped? You're not married, the sheriff said, hesitating. There's laws about this. Silas's voice cut through the cold. Then marry us. If that's what it takes for her to live free. Hallie's heart jumped, not because of the proposal, it wasn't one, but because of the fire behind it. He wasn't protecting her reputation. He was protecting her right to exist without chains. But she wasn't ready. I'll marry him, she said, steadying her voice, when I choose to. Not to make town comfortable. The sheriff looked at her long and hard. Then to Silas. Then to Amos. This is between you all. But I'll say this, if there's violence, I'll be back. And I won't be alone. The horses turned. The snow muffled their retreat. Amos stayed behind. You think you can rewrite who she is? He spat at Silas. You think she won't ruin your house the same way she ruined mine? Silas didn't speak. He walked past him, down the slope toward the woodshed. Amos turned to Hallie. You were nothing before me. You'll be nothing after. She stepped forward until her breath met his in the air. Then why are you so afraid I'll say something? She didn't flinch when he raised his hand. He didn't swing. He only stared, like a man who realized the grave he dug had become his own. She watched him go. The wind blew the door shut behind her. That night, Silas didn't sit outside. He stayed in the cabin, fixing Clover's boots while the fire snapped. Hallie handed him the thread without speaking, and their fingers brushed. Later, as the children slept and wind rattled the shutters, she stood beside him near the hearth. I'm not ready to be a wife, she said. Not yet. He looked up. You don't owe me anything. I know. But I want to be. Someday. When I'm not stitching myself back together with every sunrise. He nodded. I can wait. I never had someone wait before. I never had someone worth waiting for. She sat beside him on the floor. Their shoulders touched. The ghosts didn't speak that night. The fire crackled loud enough to keep them quiet. Outside, the woods held their breath. Inside, Hallie did not flinch when Silas reached over and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Not with possession. Not with promise. Just quiet care. And somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the fear, beneath the memory of soil and dark, something warm began to take root. Not love. Not yet. But something even braver, hope. The storm rolled in without warning, as if summoned by every buried grief the land had long tried to forget. The sky turned the color of raw pewter, wind howling like a beast starved too long. Snow fell heavy, thick as fists. Trees bent. Shutters groaned. The cabin stood alone against it all, hearth lit and fragile as a candle against the cold. Inside, Hallie stirred stew with one hand and cradled Clover with the other, the child drowsy from fever. The boys sat close, drawing on the back of old paper sacks, quiet but alert. The storm made even their young hearts still. Silas had gone out for wood. He hadn't returned. The clock ticked slow. The wind slammed the door once, twice. Still no sign of him. Hallie tried not to pace. She tried not to remember the way the air sounded that day her father buried her, the silence before thunder. Then, hoofbeats. Not the slow, rhythmic kind she knew. These were hurried. Heavy. She grabbed the rifle from above the mantel. The knock didn't come. The door burst open. Silas stumbled in, snow caked across his chest and hair, blood trailing down his arm. Behind him, a voice Hallie knew like a scar. Hand her over, Red Elk. She was mine first. Amos Renfield stood just beyond the frame, shotgun resting on his hip, two men flanking him, both grim-eyed and drunk on power. Hallie stood tall, rifle in hand, her voice quiet but sharp. You already buried me once. It didn't stick. Amos stepped into the light. His face was cracked and wild. You think this is over? You think breathing through someone else's roof makes you something new? Silas groaned, clutching his shoulder. Hallie moved to him, but he shook his head. Watch the children, he rasped. No, she whispered. You dug me out. I won't let you bleed alone. Amos stepped forward. The other men followed, boots crunching on the wooden floor, dripping snow. One reached for the twins. Hallie moved faster than fear. She leveled the rifle, hands trembling, barrel aimed at the floor near their feet. She fired once. The sound cracked through the cabin like a broken bone. The shot struck the plank beside Amos's boot. Everyone froze. I won't shoot to scare next time, she said, voice trembling but true. One of the men backed up a step. Amos sneered. You won't do it. You're weak. Always been. Hallie took one step closer, raising the rifle higher now. I was weak when I begged for love. When I begged you to see me. But I died in that hole, Amos. What you're speaking to now? That's someone reborn. Silas staggered up beside her, knife in hand, blood soaking his side. Leave now, he said, low and thunderous. Or we bury you. The man on Amos's right turned and ran. The other hesitated. But Amos, eyes burning with old hate, lifted his shotgun. Hallie didn't blink. She pulled the trigger. The rifle bucked hard. Her shoulders screamed. Amos was thrown back by the force, not from a bullet, but from the shock of it missing his heart by inches and splitting the wall behind him. He hit the snow. Silas charged, knife drawn, but Hallie grabbed his wrist. Don't, she said. The old her would have begged Amos to leave. The buried girl might have wept. But now, she stood above him. You can crawl back to town and tell them whatever story makes you feel bigger, she said. But you'll know the truth. You tried to kill your daughter, and she outlived you. You tried to erase her, and she made a family from firewood and strangers. Amos didn't speak. He pulled himself up, bloody snow on his coat, rage dulling into something small, something pitiful. He limped away, snow swallowing his steps. Inside, the cabin pulsed with the scent of gunpowder and pine. Silas collapsed against the wall, breath shallow. Hallie rushed to him, dropping the rifle, unbuttoning his shirt, pressing cloth to the wound. "You're not dying," she whispered. "Not planning on it," he muttered. The children emerged from behind the curtain, eyes wide. Hallie nodded, reassuring. "It's over." Ash stepped forward with a bandage from the kitchen. Nico held Silas's hand. Clover leaned against Hallie's side. They worked as one, fast, gentle, quiet. Hours passed. The blizzard roared on, but they stayed warm. When the bleeding slowed and Silas's breath deepened, Hallie stepped out onto the porch alone. Snow kissed her lashes. The cold didn't bite the same anymore. Above her, the sky began to clear, just a sliver, just enough to show stars blinking in the dark like the eyes of ancestors. She breathed in deep, heart thudding like hooves over fresh earth. She turned back inside. The next morning, word had already spread. No sheriff came. No townsfolk. No threats. Only a folded letter left near the fence post, with 4 words in unfamiliar handwriting. "You're free. Stay free." Later that week, as the sky softened and the pines dripped their burden drop by drop, Hallie stood with Silas near the fire. His wound healing. The children laughing outside, throwing slush at one another. "I thought I'd never belong anywhere," she said softly. Silas looked at her with the steadiness that made her knees weak in quiet ways. "You didn't have to belong anywhere. You are." And then, not rushed or dramatic, he opened a small carved box and held out a ring made of woven leather and silver. "I won't ask," he said. "But I'll wait, if you'll have me." She didn't take it. She put it on. That night, they gathered around the table, 5 hands and 2 hearts, bound not by blood or law, but by choice. As they shared stew and laughter, Hallie looked around the cabin and whispered something only the fire could hear. "I was buried once. But it was here, in this snow, with this man and these children, that I came alive. Sometimes storms come to tear apart. And sometimes, they come to sweep the past clean. So something tender can begin again."